Picture this with me. It's 2005. A small studio, maybe 100 people at most, releases a game about hunting down giant shadows. No regular enemies, no real tutorial, no minimap. Just you, a horse, and 16 colossal creatures scattered across an empty world. Nobody knew if it would work. Nobody had ever made anything like it before. Shadow of the Colossus sold well enough to become a classic, but the important part isn't the sales. It's the fact that someone was willing to bet on an idea with absolutely no guarantee of success. Now, imagine that same studio in 2025 trying to pitch that concept in a meeting with investors. So, it's a game with 16 bosses, no standard enemies, no inventory, no progression system, and a horse that can die if the player isn't careful. How long do you think that meeting would last?
What's up, everyone? Welcome back. Today we're talking about something that on the surface looks like just another market trend, but if you take a closer look, it reveals a lot about where the gaming industry is heading.
In recent years, the AAA release lineup has started feeling strange in a very specific way. It's not that games have gotten worse, a lot of them are incredible, but just look at what has been dominating showcases and sales charts. Silent Hill 2 Remake, Metal Gear Solid Remake, Dead Space Remake, Resident Evil 2, 3, and 4 Remake, and probably a Resident Evil 5 Remake at some point. The same stories, the same characters, the same structure from years ago, just rebuilt with cutting-edge graphics. The billion-dollar gaming industry seems to have discovered that the safest way to make money is to wrap our nostalgia in high definition.
Let's put this into perspective. In 2023, 7 of the 10 best-selling games in the world were sequels or remakes from already established franchises. 7 out of 10. And that wasn't an anomaly, it was the standard. If you look back at gaming history, it wasn't always like this. The 90s and early 2000s were an explosion of new IPs. Crash Bandicoot, Spyro the Dragon, Jak and Daxter the Precursor Legacy, Ico, Katamari Damacy, Okami, Psychonauts, Bully, the original Prey. Games would appear out of nowhere and completely redefine what a game could be. By the 2010s, things had already started slowing down. Budgets were rising, the stakes were getting higher, and quietly, the industry began building walls around the franchises that were already proven to work. Today, launching a brand new AAA IP is almost a rare event. Horizon Zero Dawn was one, Death Stranding was another, and even those massively successful examples came with a level of risk very few studios are willing to take twice. So, how did we get here? The answer has layers. It starts with the numbers, and the numbers are insane. Developing a modern AAA game now costs somewhere between $100 and $300 million on average, and that's before marketing even enters the conversation. Grand Theft Auto V reportedly cost around $265 million to develop alone. Cyberpunk 2077 reached roughly $314 million when everything was included. And according to industry rumors, Grand Theft Auto VI may have crossed the $2 billion mark across its entire production cycle. $2 billion. With numbers like that on the table, do you really think someone is going to greenlight a game about a silent knight wandering a desolate land, fighting 16 bosses with no traditional progression system? The problem is that game development costs grew faster than the market evolved alongside them. It's not that games sell less, they actually sell far more. But the line between massive success and catastrophic failure has become dangerously thin. A game that sells 3 million copies today can still be considered a commercial disappointment depending on its budget, and that changes everything. When the financial risk becomes absurd, companies start looking for guarantees, and in the language of the industry, guarantees have a name: established franchises. Mario sold before, The Legend of Zelda sold before, Resident Evil sold before. The audience already exists, expectations are already built. Convincing people to buy becomes infinitely easier. And this is where investors come in.
When Embracer Group acquired studios like Crystal Dynamics and Eidos Montreal, one thing became obvious very quickly. The goal wasn't necessarily to create groundbreaking art. It was risk management, portfolio management. The same logic used in stock markets: diversify around recognizable assets and minimize exposure. Games became financial assets, and financial assets don't like surprises.
And that creates a very specific fear inside studios, the fear of starting from zero. Think about this. When Naughty Dog released The Last of Us in 2013, it was a huge gamble. They stepped away from Uncharted, a beloved, safe, profitable franchise, to create something darker, slower, and more emotional. Sony approved it. The world loved it. But even Neil Druckmann has said in interviews that pitching a new IP today is far harder to justify internally. Not because ideas got worse, but because the financial argument against risk became stronger. And the strange part is this: the indie scene is more alive than ever precisely because of that. While AAA gaming drifts away from originality, games like Hades, Hollow Knight, Stardew Valley, Undertale, Disco Elysium, and Baldur's Gate 3 keep showing up to remind everyone that innovation still exists. It just moves somewhere else. And the question nobody wants to answer out loud is what happens to creativity when the space it used to occupy starts shrinking? This is where the industry discovered a tool it uses with surgical precision: nostalgia. Nostalgia is powerful because it's more than emotion. It changes the way we remember things. When you announce a remake of Resident Evil 4, you're not just selling the game. You're selling the memory of playing it when you were 12 or 14 years old. You're selling the feeling it gave you. And suddenly, the product doesn't have to compete with the modern market anymore. It competes with someone's emotional memory of the past. That's the much easier battle to win. The problem begins when nostalgia stops being the reason and becomes the strategy itself. Final Fantasy VII Remake is a fascinating example. It's genuinely excellent, arguably one of the best RPGs of its generation. But the reason it existed in the first place probably wasn't "this story deserves to be retold in a new way." It was Final Fantasy VII has one of the most passionate fandoms in gaming history, and it will sell no matter what. The final product surpassed the original business motivation. But that's not the rule, that's the exception. For every remake that elevates the original material, there's another one that exists mainly to collect money from a generation already emotionally attached to it. And somehow, players can feel the difference, even when they buy it anyway. There's a cost here that never appears in financial reports: a creative cost. When you spend years developing a sequel to something that already exists, you are, by definition, operating inside established rules. The character already has a voice, the world already has an emotional identity, the audience already has expectations. That isn't inherently bad. God of War proved you can completely reinvent a franchise without losing what made it special. But what happens to the developers who want to build something from scratch, who want to create rules that don't exist yet? They get trapped in a cycle. The most talented people eventually leave major studios and start smaller independent projects. And slowly, almost invisibly, you get a creative brain drain from AAA development into the indie space. Not dramatically, just constantly. Hideo Kojima left Konami. Ken Levine spent years stuck in creative limbo inside Take-Two Interactive. Tim Schafer nearly disappeared before Double Fine became what it is today. The people who stay inside major studios usually work on established franchises. The people who leave are the ones trying to build something new. And the current structure rewards the former while making life harder for the latter. But it's important to be fair here. Remakes are not inherently a problem. There are cases where a remake is absolutely the right move. Silent Hill 2 arrived more than 20 years after the original for a generation that never had easy access to the game, with a story worth preserving and technology finally capable of capturing what the original was trying to achieve. The same goes for Demon's Souls, because the original had become nearly inaccessible. The problem isn't the remake itself. The problem is when remakes replace innovation instead of complementing it. The real question shouldn't be remake or original, it should be, why does this remake exist? If the answer is because the story deserves to be experienced by a new generation with modern technology, that's very different from because the franchise name alone guarantees sales. One is creative, the other is calculated. And even if audiences enjoy both, they can feel the difference over time.
And this brings us to the biggest paradox in all of this. The industry keeps choosing the safe path because it's afraid of risk, but in doing so, it may actually be creating a much bigger risk in the long run. When you saturate the market with sequels and remakes, you train audiences to trust only the names they already recognize. And once that happens, every new IP, no matter how brilliant, starts at a disadvantage because players have learned to be skeptical of the unfamiliar. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Starfield launched with one of the biggest expectations of the decade, and one of the most common criticisms was that it felt too familiar, a massive game that still didn't dare to be different enough to justify its scale. It wasn't a commercial failure, but it was a warning sign. Players want new experiences. The problem is that the current structure rewards familiarity, and when familiarity eventually becomes exhausting, because eventually it will, what's left?
Maybe the biggest problem in the modern gaming industry isn't the lack of talent. Maybe it's a lack of institutional courage. The talent exists, the ideas exist, the money exists more than ever before. What no longer exists inside many major corporations is the appetite to gamble on the unknown. And that loss never appears in quarterly earnings reports, but you feel it every time you open a release calendar and think, again? And I want to make one thing clear here, I don't think remakes are the enemy. Resident Evil 4 is one of my favorite games of the last few years. Final Fantasy VII Remake surprised me emotionally in ways I never expected. These games matter, they deserve to exist. What worries me is when they stop being the exception and start becoming the standard. When the industry stops asking, what can we create, and starts asking only, what already worked before. Because somewhere out there right now, the next Shadow of the Colossus is being made by someone with a bizarre, risky idea that has no comparison to anything else on the market. The real question is, will anyone approve it in a meeting with investors?
And until the industry finds a better answer to that question, we'll keep replaying the past. Beautiful, polished, nostalgic, but still the past.